Hi guys, this is part 3 of the how to make a celeb inspired jacket. Bit of a mouthful. Thank you for coming back. Thank you for watching part 1 and part 2. If you haven't done so, go over and watch those 2 before you come back here. You might learn something. If you don't know, or you don't know how to sew, or you just want to see how a behind the scenes looks into like a construction making of a garment, this is the video for it. It is quite detailed, it's quite complex, but you will learn details and you will be more knowledgeable in why designers do what they do and how they do what they do. So before I carry on though, subscribe, hit that notification bell below for more details. At the end of the video as well, I'm going to show you how I style the 2 looks. I'm already pre-dressed in what I'm going to be wearing. I just want a plain canvas to work from. So I'm just going to pop on this lovely beauty for you guys at the end, and a little surprise for you as well. So watch the video, tell me what you think below. Love you all. Okay, so what you will need for this video is your fabric, your pattern pieces, a pair of scissors, and some pins to begin with. Let's get into it. Begin by laying your fabric out flat, selvage to selvage. That means the edge of the fabrics touching and all creases are out of the fabric. If you need to pre-iron it, then do so. Here you get your pattern pieces. I start with my side front with the center front. Also, I will move on and lay my pattern pieces that all the pieces are using the majority of the fabric and you're not wasting any fabric. Please remember to line up your fabrics that need to be cut and fold. Line them up with the fold of the fabric so that you will have the right amount of pieces when you finish cutting out. Now that you've laid out your pattern pieces, carefully pin them in place so that they can be ready to cut out. Cut out each pattern piece carefully. Remember that your collar and your pocket flap needs to be cut out twice. That is 2 pairs of each pattern. To begin sewing, we will join our side front and our center front pieces together. Remember to mark out the corners of your pockets for placement. Line up your side front and center front pieces, pin in place to avoid any movement while sewing, and stitch down the full length. Now that your pieces are sewn together and overlocked, we will move on to your next step. What we will do is now find the armhole and locate the seam that you've just sewn. You will flatten the seam towards the armhole and you will top stitch down the front on the right side of the fabric. Line the seam up with the edge of the machine foot on the right hand side and stitch all the way down to the end. A top stitch is normally used for flattening your seam, but it is also great for detailing. So if you want to take the opportunity and stitch in another colored thread, please feel free to do so. This is how your front pieces should look, with the armhole, your center front, and the seam down the front overlocked and top stitched. Alright, let's move on to the next step. Here are the pattern pieces you will need. The first thing you want to do is get your 2 pocket pieces and overlock around the edge of the full pocket piece. Fold by 1 centimeter around the full edge and stitch in place. After that, you will take your pocket flaps, you will turn them right sides together and sew 1 centimeter seam allowance around the full edge. Then we'll come back. Once you have overlocked your pockets, turn in by 1 centimeter and stitch close to the edge of the folded edge of the pocket. When you finish all the steps before, your pocket pieces should look like this. Move on to sew your pocket flaps by putting them right sides together and sewing 1 centimeter seam allowance around the edge of it. After sewing your seam allowances, your pieces should look like this. Cut a square close to the edge of the stitch as possible to avoid excess bulk inside your pockets when you turn them out. This helps your corners to be extra pointed and sharp. Repeat the top stitch process on the pocket you've just sewn and repeat all the steps for the other pocket flap. Now to attach your pockets to your jacket front. So just below the line, you place your pocket about 1.5 centimeters down and use the corner of the pocket to line it up with the seam that you have just sewn down the center front. Stitch around the full pocket, avoiding the top flat edge of your pocket. This will be your opening of your pocket. After you've stitched the top pocket in place, you will line up your pocket flap with your top pocket and stitch along the top edge. Remember to avoid catching the pocket below, so you need to make sure that your top pocket has been placed low enough not to get caught in the seam allowance. Once your top pocket and pocket flap have been pinned or stitched in place, you will now take your front yoke and line it up with the front of your jacket. Remember that the neckline goes towards the center front and the armhole continues. You can do the pocket flap and the yoke in one step, or you can take it step by step. This is how your top pocket should look when the process is completed. The top opening should be free to put stuff in your pocket. The next step is to line up your pocket flap with your top pocket and pin in place. Remember at this point, you can also line up your front yoke piece with the center front piece that you've sewn already. Remember to keep the neckline facing towards the center front. Stitch all of the pieces together. Be careful because it's quite bulky, so don't rush this process. Now that you've sewn the pieces together, your complete front should look like this with your pocket flap, room for you to put stuff inside your pocket, and later on a button can be added. Now we're going to repeat the top stitch process. This time, the seam you have just sewn, you are going to fold it up and away from the pocket, and then you are going to top stitch it towards the neckline, with the seam facing towards the neckline. So line the foot up again with the seam, but this time on the left side, and you're going to top stitch it in place. You can instantly see how it has flattened the seam, and it provides a nice finish to your jacket. Once you have completed the steps before, we will move on to your next step, which is placing the lower patch pocket. You'll repeat the steps by overlocking around the full outer edge of the pocket and folding it down by 1 centimeter and stitching it in place. After you've stitched, you will place the patch pocket where you have marked your holes. Here I'm stitching 1 centimeter around the edge of my pocket, and then I'm going to place it on. Use the holes you have marked out as reference as to where to pin your pocket, but you are free to move it higher up or as lower down as you feel free. I can't stress enough how much you need to leave an opening for your hands. The next step is the back bodice and the back portion of your jacket. You'll get your center back piece, your side back piece, and your back yoke piece. Unpin your pieces from the pattern papers and lay them out flat. Remember, your center back was cut on fold, so when open it should become a big rectangle with a slight curve at the top. What you're going to do now is stitch down the 2 seams at the back, and we're going to also move on, and I can show you just before you stitch on your yoke. You can add a feature like I have done for another jacket here. You can add on anything at this point to make your jacket a little bit more jazzy. I will go on to show you my thought process on that one because it did take a while to come up with something. Right, so I pinned this on. I can't tell if I'm meant to like undo this and put it on because I bought this ages ago for like a dress and I never used it, so I'm thinking I might just use it at the back as a subtle detailing. I'm not sure I like this, if I can get it like folded away or something, but you see that looks a bit better. I'm gonna see what I can do. So I decided to go for something else. I simply took some D-rings that I had and attached them with some velvet binding that I also had, and later on when we are out of lockdown I will add some tassels onto the end of the D-rings to create a feature. But for now, pin your feature in place and sandwich it between your bottom pieces that you've now sewn, your full bottom piece of your jacket, and also add your top yoke onto the bottom half of your jacket. Remember to pin your feature in place carefully as you go to avoid having to re-sew it again. Remember, if you have added a feature, to make sure that anything does not get in the way of the sewing machine, so please take your time when you're sewing this. Remember to overlock every seam as you go along. Remember to top stitch each seam as you are going along as well. Line your foot up with the sewing machine and push the seam towards the neckline. Stitch along the whole back yoke seam. Now that you've sewn everything in place and you've top stitched it, this is how the full piece should look. If you've decided to do another feature, just double check and make sure that none of your feature has been caught underneath or in the wrong place. Alright, so now we're going to join the front and the back pieces together. So lay your pattern out on a table or a flat surface and put your top front pieces on top of your back pieces, and you're going to stitch down the sides and at the shoulder points as well. Now that that's stitched together, remember to top stitch every seam. On your side seam, you will push the seam towards the back of the jacket, and on the shoulder seam you will push the seam towards the back of the jacket and top stitch in place. The next step, which I forgot to mention before, is to do a small snip into the back of your sleeve just to mark out which is your back and your front. You will take the sleeve and you will fold it in half and you will stitch down the side of your seam. Leave about 3 inches from the bottom of the seam where your stitch will be stopped. Mark with a little snip as well. So you will sew from the top of the seam to where the snip ends. Overlap both sides of both sleeves all the way down, even over the slit. So you can see the slit has been overlocked, and what you're going to do now is join the side seams together and sew down the full length of the sleeve, just stopping where the slit ends. So just reinforce your slit by snipping through the threads, and then we'll move on to your next step. So what you're going to do now is fold back the seam where the sleeve ends at the bottom where the wrist is, by 1 centimeter, and you're going to fold it all the way through the slit. Open the seam that you have just sewn and sew all the way into the other end of the wrist. This is what it should look like. The next step we'll focus on are your cuffs. Remember, you were meant to cut out your button stand, your collar and your cuff piece in interfacing. Iron those on to the pieces now, and then we'll move on to your next step. So what we have now is your cuff that has been interfaced, so it's quite stiff and the stretch is gone completely from my fabric. What you're going to do is just indent the fabric by folding in half and just pressing it roughly with your fingers, and just so you can get the midway point. Also, you're going to hold the cuff and you're going to overlap it by the wrist of your sleeve, the bottom part of your sleeve that we've just stitched a slit in. You're going to overlap the cuff past the slit of the sleeve by 1 centimeter, pin it in place, and go to the other end of the slit and pin the cuff in place as well, repeating the same procedure by overlapping the cuff by 1 centimeter. Tuck the cuff inside the sleeve now, so you can have the two pieces parallel to each other and laying flat. They should fit perfectly into the same width as each other. And what you're going to do is pin around the whole of the bottom of the wrist, joining the cuff and the wrist together, and then you're going to stitch everything in place. After you finish that, you should have something that looks like this. Your sleeve is now neatly attached to your cuff with the 1 centimeter overhang on each side of the slit. So I'm just checking to see if everything's done, and the seam allowance that you've connected to the sleeve, you fold it up towards the sleeve, and then you fold down the other half of the cuff to meet the edge of the cuff, making sure that your seam allowance is there for your cuff point. Alright, so now we're going to stitch all the way down to secure the cuff in place. Remember not to grab the part of the slit opening of the sleeve while you're sewing. Snip off your corners for a perfect turnout. When you turn the cuff inside out, cut down your seam allowance to avoid excess bulk, and turn your cuff inside out. Make sure you poke the corners to provide a nice sharp finish. As you can see, because we've left a centimeter, it now lines up perfectly with the slit opening. So repeat the step for the other side and sew it all in place. Now you've done that, you should have a neatly finished cuff where your slit and your cuff now meet perfectly at the seam. So what you're going to do now to get your cuff sewn perfectly flat, you're going to fold the seam allowance inside the cuff on both the cuff and on the sleeve edge as well. So fold back by 1 centimeter and lay it on top of the line that you stitched. Pin it in place and stitch along the cuff to secure all the seam allowance inside the cuff and to give you a neat finish. Stitch as close to the edge as you can and do it along the full length of the cuff. Okay, so we're back and we've stitched the whole cuff in place. Look how neat that looks. That's amazing. So once you've done that step, you will add a button on at a later date, but for now we'll just be focusing on finishing the jacket. Next step is to attach the sleeve to the armhole of the jacket. So you pin the sleeve seam to the side seam of the jacket. You will find the middle point at the top of the sleeve head and you will pin that into the shoulder seam of your jacket. When that is all pinned in place, you will sew around the circumference of the jacket. So make sure you pin it all in properly before you move on. Make sure everything fits and sew around the circumference of your jacket. Now that I have everything sewn in place and overlocked, I've also gone ahead and top stitched the sleeve in place. To top stitch, you will push your seams towards the center front and the back of your jacket. So you won't top stitch onto the sleeves, you will top stitch on the jacket. Now that your sleeves are complete, we will focus on the button stands. So get the edge that is not as straight as the bottom one. You will line that up with your top seam and you will stitch all the way down to the end. Remember that you have an inch seam allowance for your hem. Don't stitch all the way down to the button stand. Leave 1 centimeter at the bottom and also start 1 centimeter down from the top. All right, so grab your button stand and pin it to secure it at the center front. Once that is pinned in place, go ahead and stitch everything to secure it. Remember to leave 1 centimeter open at the top of your button stand and also 1 centimeter along the bottom edge. Next, we're going to quickly focus on the hem of the jacket, and we're going to overlock the hem, and then we're going to turn it up once overlocked by an inch or however much the button stand will allow. Make sure there is 1 centimeter of button stand overhanging the edge of that hemline. So what we're going to do now is stitch that in place to secure the hem. Once that is stitched, what you're going to do now is fold the button stand in half, sandwiching the hem between the button stand, and you are going to stitch as close to the bottom of the hem as possible, closing off the button stand. Once that is sewn, remember to snip down your seam allowances and your corners to give you a nice sharp finish. Turn the button stand inside out and poke your corners out nicely. The bottom of your hem should line up perfectly with your button stand edge now. So you're going to fold all of the seam allowance inside of the button stand, and you're going to fold the button stand in by 1 centimeter and lay it on top of the seam. Pin it in place to secure it. Before you sew, you need to go to the top of the button stand, and where you have that pointed edge, you're now going to fold down the neckline by an inch, and you fold the button stand in half to create the perfect fold of the two pieces, and you're going to stitch along there. But before you stitch, I'm going to cut that button stand in half, go down by just 1 centimeter, and you're going to stitch the edge closest to the fold up to the slip point. So you're going to fold it out and you have a perfect corner and a sewn edge. So the bit that is not sewn, you're now going to fold outwards so it can stand up at that point, and now you've got a 90-degree angle, 90-ish degree angle. So you're going to carry on now, folding in the rest of the button stand and pinning everything in place as you go all the way down the button stand. After you finish pinning, stitch everything in place to create the perfect button stand. As you can see, my edges are perfectly finished and the top stitch on the button stand has been done neatly. Before we carry on the top, we're going to just fold up the rest of our hem and stitch everything in place. So just line the foot against the edge of the seam of your overlock seam and stitch it all in place. We'll move on to your collar, because you can't sew the button stand at the top without having your collar ready. So you're going to get your two pieces. Remember, one piece needs to be interfaced, and you're going to put the right sides together, and you're going to stitch around the full edge, leaving the curved part of your collar open. Right, so now you've stitched around the full edge, you have your corners and everything sewn together, and you're going to have an opening at the bottom so you can insert the neckline of your sleeve into it. Remember to snip your corners as well so that your bulkiness can be gone and you have some nice sharp corners for your collar. Alright, so now you've got a perfect collar, and you're going to fold your neckline in half on your shirt and mark the middle point. Okay, do the same thing for your collar. Fold it in half, find the middle point on the side that doesn't have interfacing. Now the next step would be to find the bit on your button stand that sticks up and is not sewn yet, and you're going to line that up with the corner of the collar. Make sure the half of the collar without the seam allowance is the part that is you're attaching to your neckline of your shirt. So I would start from the middle point, and then I would attach the corner of the collar, and then I would stitch all the way along the collar. As you can see, it's now neatly stitched and everything is in place. The corners are aligned, and what you're going to do now is fold all the seam allowance up inside the collar like you did on the cuffs, and you're going to fold it all in by 1 centimeter and secure it by the seam with your pins. Do the whole thing for the collar. Here you can see I've laid it against the seam and I've pinned it all in place, ready to be sewn. Once that is all sewn, everything is sandwiched in nicely. Go ahead and top stitch the rest of the collar, and there you have it, a complete finished CELEB inspired jacket, ready to be worn, ready to be styled, ready to be slayed. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Remember to subscribe and like this video. Also, feel free to follow me on my social handles. Thank you all again. Love you all. Goodbye.